Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're continuing our journey into the many works of Junji Ito as I explain every one of his stories. This video we're going to look at some more short stories in the Venus in the Blind Spot collection and also one of the first Junji Ito stories I ever read, The Dissolving Classroom. Quick note, I know people have been asking about Uzumaki. Don't worry, I will cover that, but I was kind of saving it for last since it's such a big one and the most popular Ito work. So yeah, Uzumaki is coming. Anyway, you know the drill at this point, let's just get into the video. This is every single Junji Ito manga explained, part 6. Alright, so let's get into another short story collection, Venus in the Blind Spot. Starting with Billions Alone. This one gets into the horror almost immediately. A man's walking his dog by a river when the dog seems to be smelling something nearby. It pulls him to the edge of the river, and when he moves in to investigate, he sees a horrific sight. The corpse of a man and woman stitched together into a forced embrace. We even get a close-up shot, and man, this is pretty gnarly. Their eyelids are all stretched out and stitched together and stuff. Pretty creepy. Michio, a young shut-in, watches a news story about the dead couple before his mom starts nagging him. She mentions that he's been locked up in his room for 7 years and that he's also received notice for his coming of age ceremony and class reunion. Just a side note, coming of age day is a public holiday in Japan celebrating young people who've reached the age of maturity. As Michio looks over the notice, he remembers his childhood crush, Natsuko, saying that she was the only one who would ever talk to him in junior high. Suddenly, his radio begins making weird noises and then a voice comes through saying, "Come together everyone, come together, we're all friends. Being by yourself is boring. Reach out from your hearts. Billions alone, billions alone." Michio disagrees, saying being alone is the only way. The next day, who arrives at his door but Natsuko, all grown up and beautiful. Michio reluctantly makes his way down to talk to her. She says that everyone's been worried since he stopped coming to school all those years ago. She's helping organize the class reunion and would love for him to come. In fact, she says that her and the rest of the organizers are meeting up around the corner and brings Michio with her. The other two planners, Noriyuki and Keepsake, are glad to see Michio after all these years. They invite him to the reunion as well, and Michio learns that Noriyuki and Natsuko are getting married next year. Michio is clearly disappointed at the news, but tells them congratulations and leaves. Keepsake chases him down and asks if he wants to join in on a group date that night since they're short a guy, but Michio turns him down and walks away. On his way home, he notices a crowd is formed by the nearby waterway. He looks closer to see even more corpses stitched together. This time a total of 6, all stripped down and connected in a really disturbing manner. At the same time, a prop plane flies over the area, dropping hundreds of flyers from the Billions Alone Club, reading, "Come together everyone, being yourself is boring, we're all friends, let's all hold hands, reach out from the heart." Michio begins researching the incidents through online chat rooms when he gets a call from Natsuko. She says that Keepsake, along with everyone on the group date, went missing. A few days later, their corpses are found in the mountains, stitched together and strung up by the trees. On the news, we learn that this has begun happening all around the country and seems to only happen to groups, especially during big meetups. After hearing this, Michio calls up Natsuko and tells her she needs to cancel the reunion since the Billions Alone Club is targeting groups. She says she just really wants to do it anyway and hopes he comes. Alone once again on Christmas Eve, Michio listens to Christmas music on the radio when the station is hijacked by the club again and the same repeated phrases begin to play. The next day on Christmas morning, dozens of corpses are found sewn together in strange patterns and strung about some large Christmas trees in the center of town. This is definitely the most large scale and messed up crime scene yet. At this point, people are trying to figure out how such a big crime can be committed in public without anyone noticing the killings. It's also noted that there are no signs of resistance from the people killed. Some even believe this to be the work of aliens. Many big events are called off by local governments, but in the case of Michio's reunion, it's still taking place, only with armed guards patrolling the area. Michio does show up, but keeps his distance, watching them from behind a tree to make sure Natsuko's okay and nothing goes wrong. This is suspicious behavior, of course, and he gets questioned by the guards. Luckily, Natsuko shows up and vouches for him, and they make their way into the auditorium for the event. Once they enter, however, they find that everyone has completely vanished. As you might expect, the missing people show up a few days later in a truly grotesque fashion. Hundreds of people sewn together and wrapped around trees, resembling something like a structure. After this, people begin to avoid each other altogether, everyone staying alone in their rooms, afraid that meeting up with anyone would cause them to be abducted next. Michio calls up Natsuko on the phone, and it's clear she's depressed, having lost her friends and fiance. So Michio decides he'll come see her, and she says she'd like that. As he makes his way to Natsuko's place, he says that, to be honest, he wouldn't mind becoming part of a group corpse if it was with her. Yeah, that's a little creepy, dude. Another plane flies over the area, leaving the Billions Alone flyers, but it's followed by military jets. Michio's hyped when he sees sees this, thinking the military's finally taking action, and thinks everything's gonna be okay. He declares that when he finds Natsuko, he's gonna confess his feelings for her. But when he arrives, he hears someone saying, come together, come together. Being by yourself is boring. On the final page, we see that it's Natsuko saying these words, and she's sewing together her parents and dog. In the last panel, we see that the military jets are now dropping the flyers as well, and that is Billions Alone. I gotta say, I really like this one. I think the idea of a loneliness apocalypse is pretty great. As much as I love a vague ending, which is common in this Lovecraft style horror, this is one where I wish I had some more answers. Who or what is causing the murders, and was Natsuko in on it the whole time? Is she just possessed, or is she just gone mad and she's copying the murderers? I don't know. What do you guys think on this one? Next up, we have The Human Chair. This is actually an adaptation of a story by Edogawa Rampo. Rampo's a well-known Japanese mystery and horror author. He was heavily inspired by several Western writers, namely Edgar Allan Poe, and his name is actually a Japanese rendering of Edgar Allan Poe. The story starts with a young woman walking by a furniture workshop in a small town. She's traveling on holiday and happen upon the shop. Apparently she's a writer and needs a new comfy chair to sit in while writing. The shop owner takes chairs really seriously, saying that the right chair can change a person's life. He mentions a situation in which this happened and wants to tell her the tale, but first needs to show her something. In the back room, he keeps a large armchair that's connected to this mysterious story. He begins the tale, which is concerning a long-forgotten novelist named Yoshiko Togawa. One day, a curious manuscript was delivered to her door with no name or return address attached. The manuscript was about an ugly furniture maker who hid himself inside of a chair he built so that he could feel the embrace of women who sat in it. You know, a real pervert. It continues to say that the chair was first placed in a hotel before eventually being sold to a government official, and that the chairmaker fell in love with this man's wife. Yoshiko's pretty freaked out at this point, feeling like the manuscript is talking about her, but she receives a second letter saying it was fiction. Apparently the story went to be published anonymously as The Human Chair and became #1 in a reader survey, even surpassing Yoshiko's work. She sits in her chair sulking over coming up second, but becomes suddenly paranoid about the chair. That night, Yoshiko hears strange footsteps in the house. She wakes her husband up to investigate, and it sounds like the steps are coming from the study where Yoshiko writes. As her husband looks around the room, Yoshiko sees a face pushing out of the chair, but her husband doesn't believe her and even whacks the hell out of it to prove no one's in there. Regardless, Yoshiko avoids the chair after this. One day, she gets another letter that says that she hasn't been sitting in the chair lately and that makes him sad. It goes on to say that her husband is a terrible man for beating him and that he is essential to Yoshiko's writing. He ends the letter by saying, "I eagerly await the day when I can become one with you forever." Yoshiko destroys the letter in terror. Later, her husband is getting pissed that Yoshiko is refusing to use the chair that he got for her. He sits in it to prove that nothing's wrong with it, but a knife pokes through the back of the seat, stabbing and killing him. Yoshiko calls the police, and when they arrive, she demands that they rip open the chair to reveal a terrifying sight. The chair is fitted for a human body to fit perfectly inside. Back in the present, the workshop owner concludes the story by saying that Yoshiko never got out of her creative slump and eventually went mad, running away never to be seen again. The woman from Tokyo asks if this is the same chair, and the owner tells her it's not, since that chair was seized by the police. He says it does play a key role in the story, however, and pulls the back off the chair. Inside are two mummified corpses. This is Yoshiko Togawa and the man in the chair. Apparently, she sought him out after going mad, and the two lived as a couple inside the chair for the rest of their days. He goes on to say that the couple actually had children and that he is one of their descendants. He says that he actually recognizes the girl as Yuzuho Hayama and is familiar with her writing. He also notes that she too is in a writing slump and that he will have a chair especially made for her. Of course, the girl freaks out and runs away. Back in Tokyo, Yuzuho is still having trouble writing and is quite depressed when suddenly some movers show up with a chair. She begins to scream, saying she never ordered this chair, and in the final panel we see the chair begin to squirm, much like Yoshiko's. And that's The Human Chair. This one's pretty cool. I'll definitely be checking out the original Rampo story. Next up, in Unearthly Love. This is actually another Edogawa Rampo adaptation. It seems like Ito's a big fan. The story follows Kyoko, a woman who marries a rich and handsome man named Kodono. Before marrying him, she heard rumors that he was a strange man who hated women, but it seems this is untrue and the two are happy together. Not long after the marriage, however, Kodono seems kind of distracted and lost in his thoughts. Kyoko begins to notice him sneaking off to the storehouse in the early morning. One morning, she follows him and finds that he's on the second floor and has locked the door. Kyoko hears voices, and it seems clear that he's been sneaking in here to meet another woman. Listening into the conversation, it becomes clear that Kodono loves this woman more than his wife, and even says that they've been together since his youth. Kind of weird. Kodono finally leaves alone, and Kyoko climbs up to the second floor of the storehouse to confront the woman. Despite searching all over, she doesn't find anyone else there. She continues to follow her husband and hear his whispered conversations, but never actually sees a woman. One night she does notice that there's the sound of a lid closing and a lock. So the next day Kyoko searches the attic once again, opening several chests until she finds a small box with a beautiful doll in it. It can't be that this doll is who Kodono's been talking to, can it? The next day Kyoko hides in the storeroom until her husband shows up and confirms this disturbing reality. He is in love with the doll, and in a particularly uncomfortable scene, he begins to have sex with it. It's really creepy and bizarre. Kyoko's face here says it all. Kodono sneaks off again the next day to find that his precious doll is destroyed, clearly by the hands of Kyoko. She waits for her husband to return, hoping this would end the whole ordeal, but Kodono never comes back to the house. She finally goes to see what he's doing, only to find a terrible sight. Kodono has stabbed himself and died holding his true love, the doll. Kyoko notes that the doll wore an eerie smile on its face. And that's the end of An Unearthly Love. Next up, Venus in the Blind Spot, the short that this collection is actually named after. It follows the beautiful Mariko, a girl obsessed with UFOs, and as the story begins, she believes she's spotted one outside of her house. After it disappears, she notices that some other members of the UFO Society are standing outside of her house and rushes down to tell them what she just witnessed. But as she approaches the group, she seems to disappear, or rather turn invisible. Her disembodied voice scolds one of the members, Iwata, saying he should look at someone when they're talking to him. She says she'll see them at the next meeting and runs back to her house, becoming visible again when she gets far enough away. Iwata laments over how he can't see the person he loves most in the world up close anymore. Then we get a little backstory as to what the hell's going on here. He first met Mariko Shono at a UFO symposium held in the city. Mariko and her father, a successful doctor, launched the UFO Research Society shortly after, and Iwata signed up. The meetings always took place at the Shono house, and all the men in the group quickly became infatuated with Mariko. Slowly, the women in the group left one by one, and eventually it became all males who were in love with Mariko Shono. They relate her beauty to that of the famous UFO story of a man who encountered an alien from Venus who was said to be stunningly beautiful. Once Dr. Shono realized this was happening, he wanted to disband the group, but Mariko convinced him otherwise, saying this is her only reason for living. Around that time is when Mariko began disappearing up close, and it seems that most of the men of the group witnessed the same effect. In the present, Sano, a new member, is attending his first meeting, and it seems like he can actually still see Mariko, unlike the rest of the guys. One of the men then says he wants to discuss alien abduction. He says that he woke up in a bright room and that white shadow people were looking over him. Next thing he remembers, he woke up in the park with a bad headache and no memory of ever traveling there. He then declares that it was after this that Mariko began to disappear from his sight, and that in truth he can't even see her right now. He confesses his love for her and goes on to say that he found a strange scar on his head that he believes is the work of aliens. Everyone starts searching their heads to find that they also have the scars. They all start freaking out, confessing their love for Mariko and trying to find her in the room, like some kind of simp version of Marco Polo. New guy Sano defends Mariko and tells the group they've all lost their minds. At that point, Dr. Shono walks into the room and puts a stop to the whole ordeal, disbanding the society once and for all. Afterward, he invites Sano to have some wine with him, I guess since he was the only person not lusting after his daughter. Although he already seems to be developing feelings for her, as well as saying he plans on being her personal bodyguard. Eventually, Sano is completely wasted and passes out. Dr. Shono makes a late night call, and then we learn the shocking truth. The doctor has taken Sano to a lab to conduct brain surgery on him. He inserts a microcapsule into his head, and I guess Mariko's favorite earrings have a device that emits a signal. When it's received by the capsule, it causes the brain to be unable to recognize Mariko. Dr. Shono explains that after the surgery, he uses a drug that makes his victims lose their memories of the incident, and he's done this to all of the UFO Society members as a weird way of protecting his daughter. He also says he's found a way to enhance the signal so that they'll be unable to see Mariko from long distances soon enough. The whole thing is a suspension of disbelief, but whatever, it's kind of a cool concept. Next, we see Sano waking up in a hospital and assuming he's been abducted by aliens. He rushes back to the Shono house and finds the housekeeper dead on the floor. In the backyard, he finds the other members of the society all carrying Mariko and believe her to be an alien from Venus who can turn invisible to confuse them. Sano tries to stop them, but they knock him out with a rock. In a dark and tragic turn, the men then commit unspeakable acts on Mariko and kill her. Her body was later found unrecognizable in the garden. We learn that the men are arrested for the murder and that the capsules were removed from their heads. Sometime after this, Sano finds himself having a strange experience. The close-up images of Mariko that his mind blocked out are now appearing like a kaleidoscope and filling his vision. And that is the end of this pretty sad story. The Licking Woman. A man walks alone at night when he notices a strange woman approaching him with hair covering her face. Out of the hair pops a huge and disgusting tongue, and the man screams out. Later, he arrives at his fiancée Miku's place and tells her what happened. Apparently the woman licked him on the face and hand, leaving her spit all over him. Miku's dog licks his hand and he decides he should probably take a bath. That night he complains that he feels itchy and can't sleep. Miku turns on the light to find that her fiancé is covered in a horrible rash and her dog is foaming at the mouth. He's rushed to the hospital but dies shortly after arriving. Miku informs the police about the licking woman, and the autopsy did reveal that there was poison in the saliva found on the body. A few days later, a salaryman walks down the street at night and encounters the woman. This time we get a better view of her face and her gigantic, grotesque tongue bulging out of her mouth. We see on the news that there's been a slew of incidents and the town is in a panic, warning people to avoid going out at night. The only useful thing they found is that if you were licked, you can wash the poison off with water as long as you do it immediately after. Miku then forms a neighborhood watch to help find and catch the woman, with the group all carrying water in case of an attack. They stumble upon a poor little kid being licked all over by the woman and chase after her while some stay behind to wash off the boy. The licking woman makes a pretty quick escape and the group splits up to find her. Miku spots her in an alley and confronts her. The woman licks her face, and I can't overstate how gross the tongue is here. When more of the watch show up, the licking woman bolts, but Miku tackles her, and surprisingly only halfway through the story they actually catch her. A news report says they didn't actually find anything unusual about the woman, and there were no poisonous substances discovered either. The woman was sent to a psychiatric hospital, and although the terror was over, the licking woman's victims, including Miku, are all still traumatized over the incident. Several years later, Miku meets a woman named Nagoka at a local cafe that claims to have been a victim as well. She mentions that she heard the licking woman actually made it out of the hospital and that she immediately went missing after. Miku says she hates the licking woman and that if she shows up again and starts committing crimes, Miku will find and kill her. Nagoka says she works in a lab and could get a hold of some cyanide. She suggests that they could trick the licking woman into ingesting it. Next, we see a news report mentioning that the licking woman is back and has already killed 5 people. Miku's been patrolling the streets alone, hoping to find her. Then one night, she finally does. The woman moves in to lick her and this time straight French kisses her. Ugh, that's gross. She begins licking her arms and then suddenly cries out in pain as her mouth begins to froth. I guess Miku had doused herself in the cyanide and the plan is working quite well. The licking woman lays on the ground dying as her mouth fills with foam and her tongue swells up. Although in a disgusting twist, she grabs her fat tongue and rips it out of her mouth before she dies. Miku notices that the woman's purse has spilled and there are some familiar looking glasses inside. Suddenly the tongue jumps from the ground straight into Miku's mouth. The tongue continues to bounce around on the ground and Miku just runs away screaming. The news reports the death of the licking woman, but no mention of her severed tongue. Miku tries to call Nagoka to tell her what happened, but her phone is disconnected and Miku can't find any evidence that this girl even existed. She then remembers the glasses she saw by the licking woman and realizes they looked exactly like Nagoka's. Could she have been the licking woman? If so, why did she give Miku the cyanide to kill her? The days go on and Miku still has a deep and unsettling fear that she can't shake. She eventually meets a man and falls in love with him. She finally begins to forget her awful past, but when her and her new boyfriend go in for their first kiss, Miku's tongue bulges in a grotesque fashion just like the licking woman. It fills the dude's mouth and for a moment they're just connected by the tongue in shock and terror. The tongue then jumps out of Miku's mouth and hops away, but the couple are poisoned and collapse to the ground. I guess in the end, Miku couldn't escape the licking woman's tongue after all. How Love Came to Professor Kirida. This is based on the story How Love Came to Professor Gildia by English novelist Robert Hitchens. No relation to the captain of the Titanic, Robert Hitchens. The story begins with a familiar face, Yuzuho Hiyama, the author from the Human Chair story. She's got writer's block, so she's hiding out at her parents' place in the country. She checks out the storeroom and finds a collection of old books when suddenly a book falls off the shelf, The Diary of a Parrot Woman by Sumiko Hayama. This must be an old relative of Yuzuho, and she begins reading the journal. It seems Sumiko was also an aspiring writer, and the journal details her studying under a famous scholar and writer, Ingai Kirida. The journal begins with a priest, Father Murchison, who is visiting Professor Kirida. Apparently Kirida needs to learn more about Christianity for a novel he's writing. He asks Murchison if Christianity is truly a religion of love. The father confirms this to be the case, saying sins are forgiven by the love of the Lord Jesus Christ. Kirida says he's disgusted by this love. When he senses even the least bit of love from someone, it sickens him. This guy's a real peach, huh? He says for him there is no such thing as love, and all that needs to exist in the world is sublime beauty. The priest admires the professor's bird, and Kirida says that this parrot is excellent at imitating humans, saying it's no superficial mimicry. The bird actually studies his subjects before doing an impression. At that point, the parrot begins to speak, saying, "Hayama, you still can't write anything but these lukewarm tales. Come back when you don't disgrace yourself." The bird is clearly impersonating Kirida, and he tells the priest about the annoying college girl who's been pestering him with her terrible writings. The girl has is actually coming in today, and he asked her to wait outside until he's finished with the priest. As they finish up their conversation, Hayama runs up to the professor asking if he's read her manuscript. He trashes her work and tells her to quit wasting his time. Father Murchison offers to walk her home, and she praises Professor Kirida and says all she wants is his approval. The priest asks if she's in love with him, and she's a little flustered. He says that after meeting with him, it's clear that Kirida is in desperate need of love, and that if she loves him, maybe he'll see the beauty of her work. Something strange then happens when a gust of hot wind hits the father in the face. The next day, Father Murchison meets with the professor once again. Kirida says that the priest must have been giving Hayama ideas as she showed up with a love letter to him disguised as a story. This dude's so cold-blooded, he says he just ripped it up in front of her and told her that she has zero talent. He looks pretty pleased with himself, saying he finally got rid of that idiot for good. Later, as Murchison walks back home, he sees a commotion by a bridge. Apparently, someone had jumped off, attempting suicide. This person is none other than Hayama. Murchison feels guilty over this incident and goes back to speak with Kirida, who's acting pretty strange, like he's wrestling with the air. It seems he's being haunted by a ghost that keeps acting affectionate toward him. Kirida absolutely hates it, saying it seeks his love. At this point, it's assumed that the ghost must be Hayama's. That is until the father reveals that Hayama survived and is in a coma. Kirida then yells at the priest, saying if he can't help him, he should leave. A few days later, Father Murchison stops by again, and the housekeeper begs him to help her. Professor Kirida is sprawled out on the floor, completely run down from fighting off the ghost. He tells the priest that he believes it is Hayama, and although he doesn't want to sound unscientific, he believes somehow Hayama's spirit has left her body and is tormenting him. Father Murchison then reveals that he too has had an experience like this. In his native land, he gained an admirer in his church. The woman became obsessed and wanted his attention so badly that she would do anything, even coming to him at night fully nude. At this moment, the phantom begins grabbing at the professor again, and this time we can actually see the face and hand impressions on his clothes. Then the parrot begins yelling out, "I love you, I want you, please love only me." The priest instantly recognizes this voice as the woman who stalked him. He then realizes this phantom is not Hayama's spirit, but Murchison's admirer. Kirida's body seems to finally give out, and he dies on the spot. Meanwhile, the woman uses the bird to speak. She says that she was only trying to make him jealous by following Kirida. She says that he's in the wrong for having an affair with that Japanese girl. I guess she just means the fact that Murchison even spoke to Hayama. The journal ends saying the priest later died as well, but never told the story of what happened to Kirida. As Yuzuo reflects on what she's read, she suddenly feels a gust of hot breath on her face. And that concludes how love came to Professor Kirida. The Enigma of Amigara Fault. This story starts with a big earthquake that destroyed several towns in a certain prefecture. At the epicenter of the earthquake on the slope of Amigara Mountain, a large fault was discovered that was kilometers long and incredibly deep. We see a man searching for the fault when he sees a woman hiking as well. The young pair, Owaki and Yoshida, seem to both be drawn to the area for some reason. They hear voices and follow them to finally find the fault line, and it's many onlookers who are also drawn here. Immediately they notice a strange sight: thousands of human-shaped holes found in the fault. Some researchers are investigating one of the holes. Using a 30-meter fiberscope, they find that the holes seem to go on endlessly, curving off into the mountain. They say it's impossible that this could be a natural formation, but how could someone dig out these shapes from solid rock? Yoshida then begins looking for something. She explains that on TV she got a glimpse of the holes and that she saw one hole in particular that was her shape. Owaki questions her, saying it sounds a little egotistical to say that a hole is based on her shape, and she gets pissed off. They're approached by a man named Nagagaki who says he also came looking for his hole and managed to find it right here. Owaki is skeptical, and Nakagaki says he'll prove that this is his hole. Yes, I realize how funny that sentence sounds. He strips down to his underwear and slides into the body-shaped hole, disappearing deep within. The researchers use the fiberscope, but see no sign of him even 30 meters in. A rescue team shows up and even bring a really short dude to try to climb in, but no luck. Nagagaki is gone. Yoshida's just in shock, staring at the hole in terror. Night's fallen and Owaki sets up a tent in the area. While he sleeps, he has a bizarre nightmare. In this nightmare, he is Nagagaki, completely trapped in the pitch-black dark, hundreds of meters deep in the hole. He gets to a point where the hole becomes misshapen and he can no longer move. He screams in terror, stuck deep in the mountain. Man, this is making me so claustrophobic. I found myself holding my breath reading it. He wakes up from the nightmare and finds Yoshida outside his tent. She wants to show him something and leads him to a hole shaped just like her. She stares at it, shaking, and says this tunnel was made for her and it's been waiting for her to enter it. It seems she's already accepted the inevitability that one day she'll enter the hole. Later, a man basically rock climbs climbs up to his hole and enters it, followed by many more people feeling compelled to do the same. Yoshida's still freaking out, screaming that she's going to die in that hole. Owaki fills the hole up with rocks, completely blocking it off, to try and calm Yoshida down. That night, she's too afraid to be alone, and Owaki lets her stay in his tent. The two share a romantic moment and go in for a kiss. That night, Owaki has another nightmare. This time, he's a man from an ancient era who's committed some terrible crime and is about to be punished. On the cliff, there are hundreds of human-shaped holes, and he's forced into one. As he slides through the holes, he starts to notice the shape change slightly, and his limbs begin to stretch out and bend to fit the hole. Owaki wakes up in the middle of the night to find that Yoshida is missing. He searches around and sees that the rocks have been removed from her hole, and it seems clear that she couldn't resist entering it. Owaki sits in despair, but then notices another nearby hole that's shaped just like him. As his eyes glaze over, he removes his clothes and walks into his hole. Months later, the researchers have found another fault on the other side of the mountain. This one also has holes, but these are not human-shaped. Instead, they're long and twisted. As one of the researchers looks into a hole, he sees a highly disturbing sight. A completely deformed person making their way through, their body being stretched out from the changing form of the hole. So it seems Owaki's dream wasn't so far off, and that this is the result of a human coming out of the other side of the mountain. The Sad Tale of the Principal Post. This one is really short, only a few pages, and is actually in full color in this collection. We see a dinner party being hosted in a large and beautiful house. As the guests comment on how nice it is, someone cries out in pain from somewhere in the house. The daughter of the family recognizes the voice as her father, and everyone rushes to see what's wrong. The voice seems to be coming from under the house, and so the group climbs into the crawl space only to find that the man is completely crushed under the principal post of the house. The wife is just in shock and asks how he ended up this way, and he just says, "It's a long story." I don't know why, but I find that hilarious. The wife says she'll call a carpenter, but the husband refuses the help, saying if the principal post is removed to save him, the whole house could collapse. The man then dies, literally supporting the house he spent so long building. The final panel shows that his skeleton still remains there today, and no one will ever know how he ended up under the post. Keepsake. This tale begins with the sound of a baby crying in a graveyard. It appears to be coming from the coffin of a recently deceased wife of a wealthy man. After digging up the grave, he's met with a truly disturbing sight, a newborn baby protruding from the corpse of his dead wife. A doctor says that this child must be the man's, but he says that's ridiculous. Clearly the child was abandoned in the grave. They take a closer look, however, and the baby even has an umbilical cord which is still attached to the corpse. Some of the local people who have crowded around the spectacle say that the man should feel blessed and call the child a keepsake from his late wife. Toyoji, the apparent father of the child, speaks to his parents about the situation. His father says that they must raise the child, if anything, to keep up appearances, and his mother says appearances went out the window when Toyoji took his mistress as a new wife. Yeah, I guess Toyoji was cheating on his wife with this chick and then married her. In fact, they just had a baby. His mistress Omitsu is pissed off about the corpse baby and refuses to raise it, so Toyoji hires a nurse to raise the baby instead. This baby's looking a little creepy, by the way. Toyoji wonders how this could have happened, since his wife, Osuzu, wasn't able to have a child before she died. He then recounts memories from the previous year, when Osuzu confronted him on his cheating and the fact that the mistress was pregnant. She doesn't seem all that heartbroken about it, just a little pissed off. She asks if the child was intended to be Toyoji's heir and actually encourages it, saying that since she can't have kids, they'll raise this child as theirs. Of course, Omitsu isn't happy about the idea at all, and she tells Toyoji to kill Osuzu. He manages to acquire an untraceable poison that he puts in her food until she slowly dies. Now we jump a few years into the future, and the two babies are now little boys. And you can guess pretty quickly which one was born from a dead body, because this kid Manchuro looks a little disturbing, man. His half-brother Suke is freaked out by Manchuro and cries to Omitsu. She ties Manchuro to a post and clearly treats him badly out of resentment. The nurse who raised Manchuro, Otane, finds him and lets him loose. Omitsu catches her and chews her out, saying she needs to discipline her boy better. Then she grabs Otane by the hair and declares she'll discipline her first. She ties her up and splashes cold water on her head and then starts slapping her. Toyoji walks in and tells her to stop, but Omitsu starts chewing him out, saying this is all his fault for having sex with his wife while she was dying and getting her pregnant. Otane then starts laughing like a creep. She says that Osutsu wasn't impregnated while she was dying, but after she was already dead. During the night of the wake, Otane walked in to find Toyoji having sex with his dead wife's corpse. Then, in an even bigger twist, Toyoji claims he had no choice. He says he was alone with the body in the altar room when suddenly Osutsu's corpse opened its eyes and begged Toyoji to make a baby with her. Of course, Omitsu is disgusted by this, calling him filthy. Then Manchuro, that creepy ass kid, stares in from the doorway. He actually kind of reminds me of the guy from Long Dream. In the final panel, it says that 9 months have passed since Toyoji's second wife has died, and that Otane became his third wife. We see Omitsu's grave, and it appears a baby is crying from the coffin. And there you have it, Keepsake. Let's end this on a light note with the last story of the collection, Master Umezz and Me. So a little backstory to this one: Kazuo Uematsu, or Kazuo Umezz, was a very influential horror manga author and a huge inspiration to Junji Ito and many other writers. Unfortunately, he passed away recently on October 28, 2024 at the age of 88. I've actually covered some of his comics before in the Disturbing Manga Iceberg, and I plan on doing a similar series in the future where I go through all of Kazuo Uematsu's work at some point as well. Anyway, let's get into this story, which is an autobiographical account of Ito's relationship with Uematsu as a fan. It begins with Ito as a boy discovering his first work by Uematsu, Sister Mummy, which he was immediately impressed by. After this, his sister got him another manga by the author, and this cemented his interest in the man's work. Next, he reads a part of Drifting Classroom in a shonen magazine, but he wants to read the whole series, not just a portion. Finally, he gets a full volume as a birthday present from his sister, but it's volume 11, the last one. So he had to start with the final chapters, and it wasn't until later that he finally read the full story. He mentioned how much he loved Makoto-chan, one of Uematsu's popular works, and how even when he was sick, he laughed so hard that it physically hurt him. You get the idea here. It basically just catalogs the history of his fandom. In the second half, he's an adult and talks about how he was asked to make a manga adaptation of an upcoming movie created by Kazuo Uematsu. This is a great honor for Ito, and after reading the script, he starts sketching up some ideas for how the monster would look. Unfortunately, he was too busy to make the manga, and later when he saw the film, he was completely relieved because the monster in the movie was so different than what he imagined. It ends with Ito saying he eventually met Umezz and how grateful he is to have been able to visit him at his house. And that is the Venus in the Blind Spot collection. Next, we're moving into Dissolving Classroom. This is a collection of stories following the bizarre and disturbing Ozawa siblings. Technically, this is all one story, but the chapters feel independent from each other and have separate titles, so we'll go chapter by chapter here. Starting with Dissolving Classroom. This story begins with a transfer student, Yuma Ozawa, introducing himself to the class. He seems like a normal dude, but after he introduces himself, he just starts apologizing profusely. The class begins laughing because of the odd behavior, and Yuma just keeps apologizing constantly over the most minor things, and sometimes for no reason at all. Some bullies corner Yuma in the bathroom and tell him his apologies aren't good enough, and one guy stomps his face into the dirty floor. One of Yuma's classmates, Keiko, spots him leaving the bathroom with toilet water all over him and gives him a handkerchief. Of course, Yuma says sorry immediately, and Keiko calls him out for apologizing too much. On her walk home, Keiko encounters a strange little girl that seems to be following her. Eventually, Keiko is freaked out enough to just run, but the little girl keeps appearing in front of her wherever she goes. The girl says she wants to suck out Keiko's brains and sticks her long tongue out, looking like a straight up ghoul. Keiko turns and runs right in front of a moving truck, ending up in the hospital. Luckily, she's okay with just minor injuries. She wakes up in terror, remembering the creepy girl who chased her. Then Ozawa shows up randomly and starts apologizing immediately to Keiko's parents, saying that the person who's responsible for the incident is his sister. Keiko's parents want to speak with his parents, and he tells them that they actually died and that him and his sister live alone. Yuma proceeds to visit Keiko every day in the hospital to apologize, and she begins to look forward to his visit, saying that his apologies seem to have a soothing effect on her, like her heart is melting. After Keiko's released from the hospital, Yuma says he's sorry once again for his sister. He says that as a child, his parents were incredibly strict with him, and he would take out his aggression by killing small animals like frogs and snakes. His little sister Chizumi used to be a sweet little girl, and he believes that Chizumi has been possessed by the spirit of a snake, and that this is karma for him killing all of those animals when he was young. After this, a rumor began spreading around town about a creepy girl who would chase women and children around. Basically confirming this to be his sister Chizumi, Yuma is going around apologizing to people she's chased. One family threatens to call the police on Yuma, and Keiko joins in asking forgiveness as well to save his ass. She says she wants to visit Yuma's house and make friends with his sister to try to open her heart. Yuma says she has no idea how truly evil his sister is and runs off. Keiko heads to the Ozawa house by herself and talks to Chizumi. The door's unlocked and Keiko wanders inside to find a bad stench throughout the house. She follows the smell and then gets jump scared by Chizumi, who pops out with evil eyes. Keiko says she's here to be Chizumi's friend, and Chizumi says, okay, I'll be your friend if you let me slurp out all of your brains. Keiko basically tells her to quit being a freak so her brother can quit apologizing all the time, and Chizumi just laughs, telling telling her that Yuma actually gets off on apologizing and does it for pleasure. She says he's a bizarre person who enjoys killing animals. Keiko refutes this, saying he only did that out of stress and has repented. But Chizumi says Yuma didn't kill those animals out of stress, and actually it was part of a satanic ritual. According to Chizumi, he isn't apologizing to people, but rather the devil, and in return he receives intense pleasure. Keiko tells her to quit making up stories, and Chizumi's like, okay, you don't believe me? How about this? She opens up the closet to reveal the severed heads of her parents with their brains leaking out of their eye sockets. At this horrible sight, Keiko runs away in terror. Later that night, she convinces herself that those were probably just props, and she must have been stupid to fall for it. At dinner, she finds her parents have snot leaking out of their noses. It's disgusting. Also, all the plates and bowls are empty on the table, and Keiko's mom is like, I could have sworn I made dinner, but I guess I spaced out. Yeah, you don't say. The next day at school, the entire class seems to be sick with stuff leaking from their noses, including Keiko. The class bullies surround Yuma as usual and demand he apologize. Of course, the bully has snot running down his face, and when Yuma begs for forgiveness, it actually intensifies to the point that the bully has goopy liquid leaking out from every orifice on his whole face. Keiko sees the commotion and goes in to tell the bullies to stop, but finds that their eyeballs are melting out of their heads in a truly grotesque fashion. They collapse to the ground, oozing, and about that time, Chizumi shows up licking her lips like she's about to eat their melted brains. She says that Yuma's apologies are what melts the brains, and that it must be the evil waves passing between Yuma and the devil that cause it. Yuma begins apologizing for his sister's behavior, saying that when his parents died, their brains had spilled out, and that Chizumi began eating their brain juice as a baby. Dude, that's pretty messed up. Keiko's freaked out completely and tells Yuma to quit apologizing. She runs through the school, seeing dozens of dead students and teachers whose brains have dissolved, and Yuma comes chasing after her, apologizing frantically. Keiko looks back to see what looks like a demon behind Yuma as he chases her. Later, Keiko wakes up in a hospital bed. She says her brain was just starting to melt, but stopped in time. They told her that her parents were dead, but she says she doesn't really care, probably because of the brain damage. And the story ends as she speculates on what happened to the Aizawa twins, guessing that they probably started over somewhere in another town. Next up, Dissolving Beauty. A girl named Nao is meeting up with her friend Mariko from middle school after losing touch for a couple of years. Apparently, Mariko wants to introduce Nao to her boyfriend, but when Mariko shows up, she looks different. A lot different. In fact, she's hideous and barely resembles the cute girl Nao knew from middle school. She introduces her boyfriend, and guess who it is? Yuma Aizawa. Nao just can't get over Mariko's weird face, and Mariko asks Yuma if she's changed at all. Yuma says, not at all, you're as beautiful as when I first met you. And throughout the meetup, he continues to compliment her beauty. Mariko mentions that she does feel she's changed, especially when looking at old photos, but she gets all the reassurance she needs from Yuma. Even when Mariko goes to the bathroom, Yuma says she's beautiful, and Nao says that Mariko's lucky to have a boyfriend like Yuma. However, he then says that Nao is beautiful and that she's one of a kind. After this, Yuma broke up with Mariko and got together with Nao. Mariko was heartbroken, of course, and stalked the couple. One time, Nao saw Yuma on his hands and knees apologizing to Mariko, and shortly after this, she disappeared. The rumor being that she ended her own life. Nao's just glad to have Yuma to herself, and the two spend a lot of time together, with Yuma now complimenting her constantly. At one point, Nao mentions that she thinks her skin is getting bad. We see her face, and yeah, she's not looking too good. Yuma praises her beauty once more, however, saying she's as pretty as always. More time passes, and at this point, Nao's parents are straight up telling her to go to the hospital because her face has gotten so ugly they assume she has an illness. She's really starting to look like a Halloween mask or something. Nao looks through some old photos and thinks maybe she has changed, but she trusts Yuma and thinks there's no way he would lie to her. Despite getting constant reassurance from Yuma, passerby on the street start pointing at Nao and calling her a monster. Then Chizumi shows up and joins in, calling Nao a demon and a witch. Chizumi introduces herself as Yuma's sister and says, "You're falling apart. My brother must be worshiping you." She goes on to explain that the compliments that Yuma gives Nao are actually directed at the demon he worships. She says that those between the demon and Yuma's praises either have their brains dissolved or their faces crumbled. Then she starts laughing like a maniac. Yuma shows up and tells Chizumi to get lost and apologizes for his sister. Nao asks him point blank what's wrong with her face, and Yuma just goes straight into the compliments again, saying she's the most beautiful woman in the world and that her beauty transcends the laws of the universe. As he spouts this off, Nao's face begins to melt, but she accepts his flattery and says that she's so happy. From Yuma's perspective, however, we see the great demon behind her as he continues to worship its beauty. Nao explains that shortly after this, the Aizawas disappeared and that they got transferred to some other school. She says she'll never forget his words though, that she's the most beautiful goddess in the universe. But we can see that she has actually become a truly hideous monster with her eyes melting out of her head. Next up, dissolving apartment. One day a woman named Kahara gets a knock on her apartment door from a couple claiming to be her neighbors from upstairs. She opens the door and they look a little off-putting. They say they are the Izawas and give her some mochi before staggering off like zombies. The woman takes a bite of the food and says it tastes a little funny. Then she's struck with terrible stomach pain. From upstairs, the woman begins hearing the new neighbors making a racket. It sounds like they're abusing their son, insulting him as he apologizes. The next day, Kahara talks to her neighbors about what happened and they confirm they also got sick from the mochi. Mr. Arashiyama from upstairs says they must be abusing their kids, and the concerned neighbors decide to pay the Izawas a visit. Chizumi answers the door with bandages all over her face, and when Kahara asks if her parents are home, Chizumi says that they died when she was still a baby. Arashiyama asks the girl when her parents will be back, assuming she's joking. Chizumi says once again that her parents are dead, and if they want to see them so bad they can kill themselves and meet them in the underworld. Damn. Kahara ignores this comment and tells her she can always come to her if she needs anything. But Shizumi's just like, okay, I get it, you old hag. Kahara goes back to her apartment to watch some TV and then sees something dangling outside of her window. A woman's severed head swinging back and forth. A voice coming from above says, "I'm Chizumi's mommy," as the head swings. Of course, this is Chizumi, who's hanging the head on a rope from the balcony above. Once Kahara realizes what's going on, Chizumi just laughs and says, "Nice to meet you." I guess Kahara assumes the head to be a prop because she just goes back into her apartment unconcerned. Later, Yuma shows up with bruises all over his face and his glasses broken. He apologizes for the trouble his family has caused, and Kahara asks him if his parents are abusing him. He just says it's his fault and leaves. That night, the Izawas scold their son again, calling him a vile and despicable child. The neighbors have all had enough and storm up to the apartment, led by Mr. Arashiyama. Surprisingly, the actual parents answered the door this time and are pretty offended by the accusations about what they're doing to their kids. They tell them to mind their own business and slam the door on everyone's faces. Later, Kahara and the lady next door are having a chat when they spot Chizumi staring at them from the stairs. The nice old lady asks Chizumi if she'd like to come inside for some cake, and the three do just that. Chizumi eats her slice like an animal, and the two women ask her again about her parents' abuse. Chizumi then reveals that she's wearing these bandages just for fun. Pulling them off to show her face is perfectly fine. They ask about Yuma's bruises, and Chizumi says her brother is a masochist. Just then, the parents begin yelling at Yuma again as he apologizes. Arashiyama has had about enough and pounds on their door, telling them to quit being so loud. The Izawas open the door with a strange and deadly look in their eyes. They then ask Arashiyama if he wanted to join them in hell. Their eyes begin leaking a thick liquid, and Yuma comes out to apologize. He won't stop begging for forgiveness and clings to Arashiyama's leg. Even when he's pushed off, Yuma won't stop grabbing onto him and saying sorry. Finally, Arashiyama kicks him off and starts stomping on him, with Yuma's parents joining in. Kahara shows up and puts a stop to it, and out of shame, Arashiyama runs into his apartment to hide. They bring Yuma to the older woman's apartment to treat his wounds, but he once again says he's sorry and leaves. That night, the yelling starts again, and as they listen in, a drop of something falls on Kahara's cheek. They look up to see a liquid covering the ceiling coming from Arashiyama's unit. Chizumi is there just laughing, saying that the man has dissolved and that it's her brother's fault. They make their way upstairs and find that Arashiyama isn't answering the door. Next door, the Izawa seem to be getting even more aggressive. At this point, they're saying they're going to kill Yuma. Kahara barges in to find the dissolving parents pinning Yuma down. Mr. Izawa tries to strangle him, but as their bodies dissolve, Mrs. Izawa pulls out a knife to try and finish the job. Fortunately, they completely melt before they can kill the boy. The women are terrified, of course, and Chizumi just sits there laughing, saying that Yuma has a demon behind him and all who associate with him meet a terrible fate. She says that their parents died years ago, but that Yuma summons them back from hell. At this point, Kahara and the old lady begin dissolving as well. Chizumi just looks at her brother laying in a pool of the dissolved neighbors and says, "I guess it's time we move again, huh?" Moving on to Chizumi In Love. This one starts off like an urban legend. There's rumors that a creepy girl with an unearthly face is stalking the roadways, threatening passerby. Afterwards, a family member comes to the victims to apologize repeatedly, and eventually the victims disappear, leaving only a stain behind. We then see a boy named Tomihito walking down the street when he runs into Chizumi, who begins chasing him with an inhuman level of agility. She pins him down to the ground and starts licking his face, calling him cute. Later, Chizumi is singing a weird song about licking when Yuma shows up and tells her to stop making his life difficult. She just laughs, and Yuma gets down on his hands and knees begging her to stop tormenting him. Chizumi accuses him of trying to kill her using the strange demonic connection, but says that this won't work on her. In fact, it makes her stronger. Then she talks about how much she loves eating people's dissolved brains, and that when she gets home, she's going to eat some that she stored in bottles. Yuma just snaps and starts strangling his sister, chewing her out for ruining his life, but before he actually kills her, Chizumi claws his arms all to shit with her sharp fingernails. Yuma is weirdly casual about this and says says that Chizumi seems really cheerful today and even kind of cute singing her little licking song. He wonders if Chizumi might be in love. Tomie arrives home and his mother asks if something happened on the way home from school because a strange young man came by to apologize. With the urban legend in mind, Tomie tells his mother not to talk to him again so she doesn't dissolve from his apologies. The parents are a little disturbed by the attack on their son, but decide not to call the police and just talk to the girl's parents if anything else happens. The next day, Tomie isn't feeling well and stays home from school, but wakes up to the sound of someone apologizing frantically at the door. He rushes down to find that the man has already left and his mother just standing there confused. Later, Tomie father mentions the young man doing the same to him on his way home from work. Sure enough, liquid begins pouring out from the parents' eyes, nose, and mouth. Tomie runs out of the house in horror and encounters Chizumi, which only frightens him more. He keeps running until he finds a young man nearby and asks him for help. This of course is Yuma, but keep in mind that Tomie has never actually seen him and has no idea this is Chizumi's brother. Yuma then brings the boy to his house and tells him he can hide inside. He's very polite to Tomie and says he should introduce his sister, Chizumi. Clearly trying to put on makeup for the first time to impress Tomie, Chizumi looks more horrifying than ever. Yuma grabs the boy and tells him his sister is in love with him and that she's grown as a person as a result, so he begs Tomie to return the love. Tomie like, no way, and next thing you know, he's hogtied on the floor. Yuma starts saying he's sorry for doing something like this, and Chizumi tells him to stop. If he dissolves Tomie's brain, she'll never forgive him. Tomie screams for help as Chizumi dances around wildly, singing another strange song. She starts licking his face, asking if Tomie likes her, and when he says no, she bites his neck. Man, I would love to see a crossover between Soichi and Chizumi. Talk about a match made in hell. Yuma seems remorseful about the situation, although that's not saying much since he's always remorseful, but he says that Chizumi is naturally evil, claiming she's the child of a demon that impregnated his mother. Chizumi denies this and says that Yuma is the one who's pledged himself to a demon. She then opens up a cabinet to reveal dozens of bottles filled with dissolved victims. Chizumi starts chugging a bottle and Tomie passes out from shock. It seems he's now been confined here for days, with Chizumi coming in to lick his face repeatedly. Then, at one point, voices begin coming from the bottles in the cabinet. It appears the spirits of the victims are still within the sludge, and weirder than that, they decide to help the boy. The bottles knock themselves over and create a pool of liquid on the ground which surrounds Tomie. The grease lets him slip out of his restraints, and the voices cheer the boy on as he escapes. He mentions that as he ran through the night, he got the sense that someone was chasing him, but managed to outrun them. Tomie is now under the protection of the police, but his parents are nothing but stains now, and the Ozawas have jumped town once again. Interview with the Devil. Okay, this is the final part of the Dissolving series, and it begins with a familiar face. Keiko, the girl left with brain damage way back in Dissolving Classroom, is wheelchair bound and escorted by a man to an isolated house. The man enters the house and is immediately hit with a foul stench. Yuma Ozawa greets the man, and we learn his name is Hamoka and he works for the Daily News. He mentions the original incident from 2 years prior where dozens of students and faculty were found dead in a high school, their brains melted. He then mentions similar incidents sprouting up throughout the country the last couple of years. Yuma plays dumb and asks what this has to do with him. Hamoka then shows Yuma Keiko, saying that she barely escaped the incident and is now left with severe brain damage and the inability to speak. Only being able to produce a few words, she mentioned the name Yuma, making it clear that he is attached to the incident somehow. Suddenly, Yuma remembers Keiko and says that she was once very kind to him. It's unclear whether he actually just remembered her or was once again playing dumb. Hamoka says that strangely, Keiko just knew where the Ozawas were and led him here. Yuma approaches Keiko and she just screams her head off when he gets close, and I don't blame the poor girl. Yuma starts apologizing for startling her, but of course this freaks her out even more. Then they all hear some creepy laughing and Chizumi appears standing on the roof. She mocks Yuma and Keiko, asking if they're already going steady again, and then she recounts all the poor girls' faces that Yuma literally melted, as well as the countless people who have had their brains dissolved. Hamoka then asks Yuma to tell him the whole truth. He wants to know the connection between Yuma's apologies and the dissolved people. Yuma just denies it, saying not to believe his sister's stories, calling her a monster that attacks innocent people. He drops to the ground begging forgiveness once more, and Hamoka takes off with Keiko since she's freaking the hell out. He leaves her in the van and then heads back by himself to try and get some answers. However, the house is abandoned, and it seems the terrible odor is coming from the bottles of liquid which the Ozawas have been pouring down the drain. We cut to the siblings running through the woods. Chizumi's pissed off that they had to dump all that people goo since she finds it so tasty. Yuma decides they must get rid of their parents' severed heads as well and begins to bury them in the ground. He apologizes to them in tears until suddenly they basically explode, burning to a crisp. Later, Hamoka is connecting the dots between several incidents, including an elementary school boy who was kidnapped a while back. We can assume he's talking about Tomie, but sadly the boy is murdered before they're able to question him. Poor Tomie, man. At this point, Homika has acquired a decent amount of evidence directly connecting the Ozawas to the dissolving incidents. Despite being brain damaged, somehow Keiko has developed some psychic abilities and can track the Ozawas simply by pointing at a map. The siblings are now forced to sleep in a tent out in the wilderness, and as they drift off to sleep, Yuma begins hearing the disembodied voices of the victims who melted, saying they'll never forgive him. He follows the voices out of the tent to find Homika approaching in the dark. He tells Yuma all that he knows and says that he just wants the story from Yuma himself, but that either way he plans to publish an article detailing all of his findings. Yuma begins apologizing, presumably trying to kill the man, but Homika says he doesn't believe in such nonsense and that even if he dies, the story will be published. Despite giving him the opportunity to explain the truth from his perspective, Yuma takes his sister and runs once again. So the article is published with the photo of the siblings as well as all the alleged crimes. Surprisingly, the siblings show up to a news agency ready to tell the whole story. The agency sets up a conference that will broadcast to the whole nation set up by Homika. We then see Homika visiting Keiko one last time. He has a sinister look as he says that everything is going according to plan and that Keiko might want to watch the conference as it should be interesting. At this moment, Keiko sees him as he truly is, a demon, not unlike the images we've seen before of the demon that Yuma supposedly worships. As the conference begins, we see the Ozawas walk onto the stage in front of the cameras. Yuma gets down on his knees and begins apologizing at the top of his lungs to the entire country. Everyone at the conference is shocked and confused, and we see Homika wheeling in Keiko from the back. He looks still demon-like as he says that Yuma is giving off more energy than ever. We see the crowd's brains begin melting, and Keiko forces herself out of her wheelchair, making her way to the stage to try to stop Yuma. Unfortunately, she melts into a pile of goo before reaching him. Chizumi laughs and begins slurping up Keiko's dissolved body. Yuma then looks up to see something strange. The goo is floating into the air and the voices of the dead berating him once again. Suddenly, the goo, controlled by the victims, drops down on top of Yuma and Chizumi. On the final page, we see an image of the demon and learn that the media coverage was shared throughout the world. The final text reads, "What might have happened to the people that saw it, and what of the Ozawa siblings? That will have to be left to your imaginations." And that is the entire Dissolving series. Now, there are two really short stories that are added as bonuses in this collection, and they're both really weird, which I love, so let's go ahead and knock them out as well. The Return. This one starts tragically. A man is by his fiance's side as she dies. Right before she passes, she promises to return to her husband one day. The man visits her grave regularly, fully believing she will one day return. He is constantly looking for her on the streets and even visits the hospital to see if she's returned as a newborn. He claims he can feel her aura and that it seems to be getting closer to him. One day he hears the sky filled with his fiance's voice and runs outside. He sees a meteor falling from the sky and crashing to the ground nearby. Inside the meteor were found human remains. While there was no way to identify the body, the man knows this to be his fiancée. Somehow her body was made new in the heart of a meteor, only to die once again on her way back to him. This is clear by the fact that the charred hand of the corpse is wearing the engagement ring the man gave her. You think this one was weird, wait till you see this next one. Children of the Earth. After the disappearance of a group of kindergartners, a search crew made up of the family search desperately for them. Suddenly, someone spots them. The children are all stuck in holes in the ground and their eyes are glazed over. The parents rush over to them, and as they try to pull them out of the ground, the children's bodies stretch out like snakes. Suddenly, the kids' bodies begin sucking into the earth. These holes are so deep in the earth, the children were never found again. And the comic ends with a quote from a philosopher saying, "Humans were born from the earth. The children simply returned there." It then says that this opinion was heavily criticized online. Man, it's a strange enough story by itself, but the last bit about someone making a tactless comment online just makes it even weirder. Okay, that's all I got for you this week, and I'll be back next time with even more Junji Ito, so stay tuned. Thank you to everyone for watching. If you like the intro and outro music that's likely playing right now, go check out Kill Me Katie. And of course, big shout out to my patrons. If you want your name displayed at the end of every video like these fine people, consider joining the Patreon. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.